guys must be smart. And so that kind of started out us reaching out and working with them over the years.
Honestly, it can be quite profitable just to monetize them all, hit them with that paywall right away. I see a lot of companies doing that.
Hello and welcome, because in this series, we get past growth in theory. We focus on what actually sticks as companies grow, add products, face very different growth problems over time. And that's what this conversation is about. We're talking about sustainable growth, but not only the growth around the growth of your product, it's what carries it forward. What teams end up relearning the hard way. And we're going to do the heavy lifting for you this time, because we're breaking this down into 5 practical learnings that you can take back with you to your own app business. And if you're working on a subscription app, well, happy days, because if you're thinking about how growth compounds over time, this conversation is the one for you, because that's also what we're looking at. So it's all coming together, because I also have 2 guests who are growth leaders themselves, working together over a decade. So I'll just introduce you, and it's great because it's Andrew. So Andy Carvell, of course. Andy, welcome.
Hello. Happy to be on the show, Peggy. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you. And we all should know you, but no, I'm just kidding. Co-founder, CEO of Phiture, the mobile growth consultancy, probably best known for the mobile growth stack, but also helping app businesses think holistically across the life cycle. So from acquisition ASO, which you're probably best known for, but now engagement, subscriptions, measurement, much, much more. And looking at the practical side, looking at how you move a subscription app from one product and one playbook to a real portfolio. Andrew Burrington. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, all. Happy to be here.
And exciting to hear about your app, because, usually it's a little bit, it's just an app, but this is an experience. So this is where lifecycle marketing really matters. You're the senior growth leader at Onyx. That's a digital mapping company serving outdoor enthusiasts. So you have different products. You have hunt, backcountry, off-road, and you've been involved in that evolution from a single product into a growing portfolio from the start. So a lot that we can dive into, but everyone is more than a title. Everyone is more than their company. I'm looking at the 2 of you, right? And you've worked together on and off, and I think that's very important, for nearly a decade. So across the different phases of growth in your company, Andrew, and I have to be curious, you've been coming back together, working together. Not everybody works continuously. So I'd like to start there. Maybe with you, Andrew, a little bit like a relationship thing here. What is it that made you say yes, right? You're working with Andy and you're still working together. And what took a while to get right in that?
Yeah. No, Andy, it's been a long time. It's been over time. We've touched base at different stages within our growth. Where it all started actually was early on. Andy and Moritz had published the mobile growth stack, which you referenced a moment ago, and me and an early colleague found that, and it was so valuable to us as a small business thinking about where we applied our focus. And so we actually used some of their materials well before we worked with them. And, using that, we're like, hey, this is really valuable. These guys must be smart. And so that kind of started out us reaching out and working with them over the years. We've kept coming back to Phiture because they consistently brought a data-driven current point of view on mobile growth that we've trusted. Like Phiture has evolved over the years as the market has evolved. And as our business evolved, our teams, products, and consumer targets have changed. Having a partner who is deeply in tune with the industry best practices has helped us avoid relearning fundamentals every time the org shifted. The reality is Onyx has grown a lot. Like when, me and the colleague, there was 3 of us. Now there's 500 people at Onyx, right? It's a very large org. And so a lot of that information, like it's hard to keep it all together, and bringing Andy and team in just brings our teams up to speed at the moment of time when we're trying to get certain initiatives done.
Well, that's great. I mean, you guys are together, as I was thinking, longer than most other relationships, marriages, dating, what have you. There is a learning here. Maybe, Andy, you can share as a growth agency, as a growth consultancy, supporting a customer, a client over this period of time? Is there a lesson for that? Working together, staying together, coming together and when it matters, coming together and then sort of letting go and coming back. I mean, there's a continuity there that I think is very valuable.
It's been really great working with Andrew and the Onyx team, and to see their amazing success over that time. And it's been. They were really one of our very early customers, and we were super happy when they reached out. We're like, wow, we got our first lead from the US, and like because we're based in Berlin, in Germany, even though we're quite an international team, and we now have also folks working out of the US. Like, we're still mostly, Europe based in terms of our resources. So it was great to have a US company, reaching out to us, and we got out on site with them in the early days. And I think that was a super important part of like sort of building a strong foundation for the working relationship, and also for the work that we did together. I think there's a really kind of strong theme through the Onyx portfolio of, outdoor pursuits and a sort of a kind of a tangential or adjacent rather and overlapping set of audiences, that are into the kind of stuff that they're serving really well in their apps, and a really good understanding of those audiences and the kind of things that they do. Because a lot of the Onyx team are out there hunting and doing outdoor recreation activities, and they really know this problem space, right, in a way which we didn't. And so getting out on site, spending a couple of days with the Onyx team, really taking the time to understand their audience, the problems that their app was solving. It was just the Onyx Hunt app back then, and understanding the sort of technicalities of hunting and license granting, and zones where you were allowed to hunt and not, and the importance of understanding like land ownership on these things. All of those like technical details, I think, were super important in us building like that strong relationship, I think, and being able to, more importantly, being able to do impactful work with them, with a deep understanding of their, or better understanding at least, of their audience and their product. From an agency owner perspective, I think it's important not to push things, not to try to like milk a relationship, from a vendor perspective, as we are a service vendor, to try to kind of squeeze out every last dollar from a client, but to understand like when actually we've come in, we've done a good job, we've helped them to kind of get over a particular hump or fill a particular gap, and then they're like, they're rocking it on their own, to step out. The fact that they come back later, maybe when they've got new challenges, I think is, we're incredibly grateful for that. And I think it also says something about, not just trying to, just be constantly trying to sell, but rather like actually understanding and understanding what the client really needs. And we've tried to do that over the years.
Well, he's definitely back, so you've definitely done it. And it is about understanding not just his needs, but also where this all began, because I said we're breaking it down into lessons. What do you do when you're growing, but you're growing your portfolio? And so broke it down. Lesson 1, commitment beats volume, because let's look at the start. Every growth team, of course, they want more users. That's natural. But at some point, you have to realize that growth doesn't always move until you understand which users actually matter. And that's what you've done, Andrew. So I'd like you to go back in the early days of your app, when it was just one app, not your full portfolio. What were the first signs that helped you sort of distinguish between the people, the users who were just trying out the app, and people who were genuinely getting value from it? Because those are the ones that you wanted to pay attention to more naturally.
Yeah. And it's, I guess the preface too with Onyx Hunt, and Andy knows this, it's such a unique product in the sense that it's not a want, it's a need in the United States. So even a lot of how we were looking at it too, it wasn't like, are these users qualified or not? In most cases, it was either users that actually understood how to use the product or didn't get it quite yet. That was the majority of folks. And inherently, we were trying to take a product that was a copy of a Garmin GPS device. They're complicated. So it wasn't an easy product experience to use. But hunters in the US, it was a competitive advantage to have the product. So everyone was like, I must have this. I have no idea how to use it. And so, is a good position for us to be in. We transitioned our focus, where originally it really was like, okay, awesome. Just sell, sell, sell. Like people are buying it. They want the product. But as we, had been getting more sophisticated, learning more about mobile, we're like, we really need to qualify these individuals. We know what they need to learn. There's a few basic things that were really important for hunters to do. The public-private lands is the centerpiece of the product, and it helps Western hunters at the time. We've expanded across the United States, but it helped them know where to go, where to navigate. A component of that is there's not a lot of cell service in certain areas these people go, so you have to download an offline map. And then the last piece to that was there's the thing called waypoints that you drop on the map. A simple use case to that is how do I get back to my truck or my car when I'm done, right? It's very important.
Yeah.
And so we knew those insights, and we were kind of just like blasting them at users. But there was a moment where we're like, if we can figure out how to qualify users when they install the app so that they know how to do these key events, we think that we have something here and we can drive a lot more conversion. And the reality that was true. Like we spent a good bit of time focusing in on how we bring folks in and how we educate them. And that was a big moment for us, and definitely changed our thinking. As I said, it was early on was like, well, just throw the purchase button in front of them, send them emails about buying. That works really well. But it works so much better to say, how do I qualify you so that you truly find value in the product?
Because you want to go beyond just driving installs or trial starts. You want to get them on board with you. And that's literally
Absolutely.
the onboarding.
And I think, and then there's so much more, as I said, with the GPS device, there's so much more we can educate them with. So those 3 events that I referenced it was actually direct work with Andy and team where we had those insights, but there were a lot of other things that users could do. And our key question at the time was, what are the first things we need to educate them on? And then we can open up the product. And after you're qualified, there's so much other things you can learn, and the product becomes more and more valuable. But, you throw it all at a user all at once. It's so overwhelming. You don't get what you're looking for. So that was also a critical, I think, learning for us, and has really shaped us in the future of like, how do you walk people through the journey? Where should you start in that journey to really qualify them? Has been pivotal for us as we have scaled products over the years.
And you have scaled. I mean, Andy, you work with teams, not just with Andrew, but you're looking at teams, and when they don't take time to figure out this in depth, to separate the activity from the intent, to understand the signals, what starts to unravel first as they scale? What is it they need to be perhaps more aware of?
No, it's a great question, and I think it's also worth pointing out that when you're in that great position where you've got people kind of swarming at your product, I think it's very tempting and also honestly it can be quite profitable just to monetize them all. Hit them with that paywall right away. I see a lot of companies doing that and monetizing pretty well. They won't retain those users for a second year of subscription, I guess, mostly, if the user's not getting the value. But there's definitely a strategy. It does have some value for some businesses to just hit people with a paywall immediately. Immediately you've got their attention. The way the Onyx and many other companies approach things, is I think it's more tangible, it's more valuable over the long term, and it's ultimately more respectable, more honorable to actually think about like how to create, and deliver value for that customer first, and make sure that customer is getting that value before going on to like, full on monetization, or at least, even if you monetize them early, to try to get them into, to receive the value so that they don't regret it later, that they're actually getting a good experience with the app. When teams don't take the time to figure out, what is value for the customer and how to take those steps that they appreciate that value early on, then a couple of things usually happen. Like one, they might just get on a hamster wheel of constantly creating new features because they don't really know what their audience wants. And they're always like, well, maybe if we just build this next thing, then they'll love it, and then they'll all stick around, and they're like trying to solve a retention problem, which is probably already solvable if they think and look at their kind of highly engaged users and try to understand what they're doing. Maybe talk to them as well. I think that's also underrated, to actually, speak to users, especially your very loyal ones, as well as the ones who churn really quickly. They're harder to get hold of, but also can give you very valuable insight, more insight than you'll get just from looking at usage data, quantitative data. But yeah, I think so it's like either they just keep building new features, hoping the next one's going to be the one that changes the game for them. It very rarely is. Usually they've got enough features, and they should be focusing on helping people get the value of those, or making those features even better, rather than just keep adding more to the toolbox. They get stuck either into a hamster wheel of building features, or they just never really figure it out, and they just try to go for like quick fixes with acquisition. Or maybe, as I mentioned at the start there, like they just kind of give up on trying to help people experience the value and just try to monetize those users as early as possible.
Take the money and run. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just the point, Andrew, because you looked at the signals of intent. You understood what people were doing. That brings me to lesson number 2, which is, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't reset what works. Don't chase those features, because once you figure out the signals of intent, or as you did, the events that matter, and you've done that work, it changes how you see everything else. And that really starts to matter as you grow. So as we said, you didn't remain a single app for very long, which is fantastic. Congratulations, because it's not many companies that can do this, that can grow a portfolio. Now, you could treat every new product like a blank slate, or you could find a way to carry some of that learning forward. Tell me about that, because you were determined not to relearn everything at every stage.
OnX Hunt we were a mobile app company. We have been for 10 years. We've been a company for 16 years. So we had a lot of basis in hunting, but we had sold a chip for Garmin devices. So we had like a lot of this kind of like fiber within OnX. We had went from, a hard goods company to software, which was also a very interesting mindset shift. But as fast forward to where you're getting at too, is then we're like, okay, we finally learned how to be a mobile company. We've understood, intent versus just monetization. What we wanted to carry forward was how do we take these best practices forward into our new products. Also, what we worried about was losing authenticity. As Andy mentioned, and a part that we appreciated in the relationship is a deep understanding of our customer has really been a core piece of how we've won. And we carry that through our culture. We have so many people that go outdoors and do so many pursuits. Other people just are very interested in them. And that's great. It's just the culture that we have. And so as we started spanning these different outdoor groups, we were like, are we going to lose some of this customer knowledge and understanding? So how do we retain that going forward? And so, in practice, the focused one was, okay, how do we create centers of excellence around some of the different, life cycle marketing, around user acquisition? There's a lot of things, the processes and practices we've done, we're like, how do we carry those through to new products and not have each team we spin up go reinvent the wheel? Like, what a waste of time and money, right? But then also the other facet was, how do we stay, as we say it on X, built by 4? How do we stay built by 4 in each category? And in that, what we actually did, we spun up what we called vertical teams, which there's teams that the only thing they do is eat, sleep, and breathe that customer segment that they're focused on. And then there's groups that more of an agency model that service it, saying, cool, well, I spend my whole day thinking about lifecycle marketing across these different products. And so I'm going to bring that knowledge and let's try to combine those two to make an exceptional experience for the consumer. Really, there's a kind of copy paste piece where we're like, oh, cool, Hunt should work in off-road. What we do in lifecycle should just work. Not the case. So there's how you even talk about the same feature to a different user group. There's just different ways they use them. There's different use cases if you're hunting versus off-roading for a waypoint, for instance, or how you think about public-private lands. So that tie-in between these teams of the person knowing the customer and the person knowing life cycle was so pivotal to us being successful in different markets.
So it was the way you structured your teams, I think, that's key here. And one of the key learnings, and maybe a difficulty that other companies can somehow prepare to move forward without these. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about the trial and error here of forming the right teams? Because vertical and then service to those teams, that's an intriguing structure.
There's some weight added when you get a lot of different teams, a lot of different managers, and and on two different sides. Like the challenge one is for a lifecycle marketer who is kind of in an agency model that you're like newly forming, that we're not directly saying is an agency model. It's a lot of weight for that person to be like, I got to remember what the hunter needs. I got to remember what the off-roader needs. I got to remember, as it scales. And so there was definitely some challenge there of, I could see us like overwhelming certain humans. And so also on the other side, it was as we built these vertical teams, we had to kind of learn about like how should a vertical person operate in a way that they can enable these life cycle or user acquisition people to have all the right context and not be overloaded. And I'd say the challenge early on was you're like, cool, we have a user acquisition person. You got it, right? I'll go do like community marketing and other things or whatever it might be, right? And so you've got this person who's like, oh my gosh, I've got to go figure out who each of these users are by myself. And the evolution came into us being like, we have a lot of documentation and a lot of setup when we bring people in for those roles so that they can quickly understand who the customer is and what matters. But they also know what questions each vertical might have that we don't have the answers to. So they're like kind of right with us of like, hey, you can bring data to some of these situations and help us kind of evolve our understanding. But the vertical owners can be the people who kind of like house that information and take ownership on saying like, I know where we're at in our learning. I know what we want to learn, and I'll kind of keep this all on record for all of us. So, and I'd say still a work in progress. We keep adding products and lots of team members, but it's improved greatly as we've thought that way.
And you're supporting him, Andy. I mean, from your side, he has built this, he has continuity and he has a framework. It's work in progress, but it's working, and it's about adding products and adding richness to the team structure along the way to understand and build continuity and understand how to do that as they grow. Now you're supporting this. So from your side, when teams don't do this as they grow, what is the cost of that? What is the cost of not necessarily following Andrew's blueprint here?
I mean, I think first of all, I think it's one of the more impressive setups that I've seen, across the industry. The sort of level of thought there in terms of like having these kind of vertical skill sets, and then the folks who are kind of focused on specific products or audiences, and they go really deep on those, and the stuff that can go across those, and the stuff that's kind of replicable. That's one of the more advanced setups that I've seen, to be honest, when it comes to a portfolio of products. I've seen it working in different ways in different setups. There's the supercell model, right? Of like essentially every product is kind of a unique, almost universe, and they have a lot of autonomy, do a lot of things quite differently in each of those cells, but they're really, really obsessed with making that game the best game possible. And I think that works really well for them. So I think there's not a one size fits all. Probably if I would draw a parallel between Supercell and Onyx, because I think there is one actually, and that's like this sort of obsession with understanding an audience, that and having sort of a good level of overlap of audience between products, right? It's definitely not 100% overlap in either case, right? Supercell, they have different kinds of games who are appealing more to different folks, and Onyx has different kinds of outdoor rec apps that have appealed to all kinds of different folks, but they're not trying to do something completely different with each of their products. And that's not to say that you can't do that either. There are portfolios of apps out there that are much more kind of opportunistic. They just sort of see, oh, this genre of app is doing well. We're going to build a good version of something like that. That can also work, but then I think it's much harder to build the kind of replicable capabilities and continuity that you're talking about. Probably also not impossible. There's probably are still some stuff where you could, say, okay, this stuff is stuff that we can do well in every case, right? Like probably some engineering disciplines, probably some bits and pieces of marketing. But I think it's harder maybe when you're sort of starting from scratch every time with understanding an audience, and that those audiences are completely different. There's more than one way to skin a cat, as it were, in terms of like how to approach scalable continuity across a portfolio.
Continuity is important, but then you have to carry it through, and you have to see where it applies, where it doesn't apply. That's really key. And I think that's something you've done really well, Andrew. And that brings us to lesson 3, which is know when to break your own rules. Growth gets complicated and you're excited that you have something that's replicable, but then you have to realize that what worked before isn't automatically wrong, but isn't automatically right either. It's that balance. So, Andrew, I'd love to just sort of dive into your thinking here, because you have a playbook. Can you think of a moment when sticking too closely to that playbook would have been the wrong move, or would have maybe told you to do something different?
There's many cases actually that the strong foundation of the teams, as I mentioned, of having that center of excellence in the vertical, like it works so well, but there's a lot of devils in the details beneath that. One kind of framing in all of this is like, as we look at our products, like we look at the S curve of like business growth as kind of our internal focus of where is each business at on the S curve of maturity. And we're across that scale depending on which product we look at. And so when you think about how you apply parts of a playbook, it's different at different parts of the S curve for different reasons. Like a big one, even early on, is like it takes forever to get stat sig in a new product, versus in Hunt, we can get stat sig in a few days, right? And so we can really methodically go at getting the right answers, and it's a really large user base, and that's the thing that you should do as a mature business. But, we're breaking the playbook. And an example here is, as like the backcountry app came out, like the first approach was like, well, let's just take a lot of the life cycle and the onboarding, and let's just kind of throw some backcountry-esque imagery and a little bit of messaging as we know it at it, but do the same thing that Hunt does in the life cycle and the flow.
Didn't happen.
Doesn't work. And and the hard part too is like you get stuck in a point being like, well, let's wait for stat sig. And then you ask, well, when will we get stat sig? You'll get it in 6 months, because it's a new product. Yeah. So like, well, should we wait to learn, or should we, and I think that comes back to what Andy's been getting at too. And I've been hitting on as well, is just knowing your customer is the most important part. And even as a company on the lower part of the S curve being new, really like part of the reframing we had there was like, this isn't working. Like we don't see it working. And what we know from the backcountry skiers and the folks that we've talked to is they have different things that matter. And we may not have stat sig right now, but let's lean in on the customers and let's make sure that we clearly understand what's driving them. And let's start with that foundation versus starting with the foundations we've created somewhere else. So I think like for us now, it's like, as we've evolved to, it's like really like there is this foundation and this continuity that we can access and each business can access, but you've got to start your framing around how do I win for the customer that I am focused on, what drives them, and be like you deep owners of that. Then you can start really recognizing where you're like, oh, wow, our off-road team is doing this amazing life cycle thing about people finding trails. Well, guess what? Backcountry has trails too. And the life cycle they did, we think will work. So we're going to use it because that's a key thing that they need as well. And so I'd say the mistake earlier on was just like, let's just not think about that stuff. We'll just take it, copy, paste, and we'll focus on other things. And the reality is too, they're smaller teams. So a small team is like, oh gosh, if I can outsource some of that thinking, I can reduce scope and I can focus on other things. But I think that's a piece too, where it's like sometimes even smaller teams, you got to take on the bigger scope for the right items. Which can be challenging to figure out. So
there aren't those shortcuts. And I think it's really an interesting point here that you looked at like your lead users. You were looking at how are they using it and saying, okay, we might not have the data that tells us this. It's not obvious in the data, but it's showing up, and that's where we need to go. And taking a bit of a chance. I mean, it is a risk.
Working with Andy and team early on and them really helping us embody being very metrics driven and for good reason, right? There's a lot of reason you should focus in on metrics anywhere that you can. But I think that was a bit of like, it's not even a decoupling. It was just like, okay, we just got to recognize the time the framing that we're in. And if you fast forward or rewind back to Hunt early on, we had no data, and we had to work through that first, right? So it was just a recognition of like, okay, we're kind of like hopping through these S-curve stages, and we just need to recognize like what we have and what's most important at that time frame. But also not forget, like now backcountry, we have lots of metrics, lots of things driving. We have enough users. Like we're now into that stage. They're all products. They're all in the same space. We're not thinking in this kind of like maturity curve, which was
it gives the richness.
Yep.
It's almost like cold start, but at the same time, not fully cold start, because you have the continuity. So it's that balance in there. And Andy, you've been working with Andrew and helping him get that right. But teams often get this wrong. What do they get wrong when they hit this moment? They want to adapt their learnings and their product to the next product, but it's not a cut and paste. That's what we're hearing.
It's never a bad idea to have the customer at the center of everything, and really start from that position of customer centricity. And I think a lot of folks forget that and get that wrong for good reasons. Like Andrew said, like if they can save a bit of time by applying best practice. We talk a lot about best practice in the industry. It's like, lots of things should be replicable, and sometimes they are, but like you can never really assume that something that worked over there is going to work over here. And I think Andrew also mentioned StatSig, right? And just availability of data and velocity of data that enables you to make decisions quickly. I think what a lot of early stage teams don't get right, and it's to Andrew's point about the maturity curve, to not understand that they're on that curve, or to understand what it means to be at the start of a curve like that, because you won't have good data. You won't have a lot of data. You won't necessarily be tracking everything that you will be tracking later. Even if you are, you won't have a meaningful amount of that data in many cases, particularly once you get down funnel. You probably can get some good signal up at the top of the funnel from things like, paid acquisition, and hopefully later soon also from the app stores themselves. You'll get some signal there, which helps you understand audience intent maybe, and you can start to run some experiments up there. But you're not going to be able to run data-driven experiments down funnel, like on your product, on your CRM. You probably might not even be worth doing CRM in a major way in the early days, because you just will have very few users sticking around to actually receive any messaging. And in those very early days, it has to be a lot more on instinct and on, it doesn't mean that like you shouldn't still be sort of trying stuff and trying to evaluate whether it works, but the way that you evaluate that is going to be radically different, because you're not going to have, huge cohorts of data to be able to run A/B tests. You have to take bigger swings, not just be making little micro optimizations, but like really kind of directional. Okay, let's try this direction. Let's see if that actually moves the needle at all. Just in terms of just top line metrics, do we see, more engagement overall? Never mind like micro engagements, but just like we run this for a little while, like, or even just actually getting people in a room and saying, hey, is this better? And that's a very different skill, right? That iterating towards early product market fit, it's a different skill and it's a different discipline to later stage optimization of a broad kind of like multiple surface growth strategy. A lot of folks who don't get it right, they don't understand that difference.
And because you're at an entirely different stage, entirely different data. And I think that's a great way to get to lesson number 4. Real growth happens when you're learning to make it visible.
We are, we're investing quite a lot in AI and automation solutions on a couple of surfaces. One is Apple Search Ads for sure. Another is App Store optimization in the Play Store specifically.
Those things do matter. You should know where you're going and you should have a strategy. But the reality is you're trying to find these big hits we've talked about, like 40% lifts, and you're trying to find them as quickly as possible.
So I want to go full circle, final lesson here, because that's where we started, talking about where a product is in its life and the learnings. And lesson number 5 is, guess what?